we get to the second type of right angle cross of penetration. This right angle cross of penetration, the 53, the 54, the 51, and the 57. Remember, right angle crosses, you have 4 variations. That is dependent on where the personality sun is, in which of the gates. In this case, it's in the 53rd. Development. This is the gate of beginnings, and this is a format energy for the abstract process. Whenever you think about the abstract process, that is the abstract circuitry, always recognize that this is the human experiential way. It's so important to be clear about that it is the abstract process that drives us through our human evolution. Logic is there to measure. Individuality is there for its mutative potential. But the way, the movement as human is always going through this abstract process. That's why the abstract mind is where history comes from, because it is the collating of human experience and the ability to communicate it. So this 53rd gate is a very important gate, and I have a special name for this gate. I call it the gate of freedom. Now, the reason I give it that name comes from animals. In a mammal's chart, the 53rd gate is all about their need to be free. So if you've got a dog that has the 53rd gate activated and you chain it up, you're going to make it so depressed it will die. But it's also true for us in the sense that it is the freedom to initiate something new, to start something different. It's very American, this gate. I mean, in the mythology of it. It's very much a pioneer gate. It's saying, we're going to go into uncharted land for that experience. And we have to be free to be able to leave something and start something new. That's why if you have the 53rd gate, you're always going to have points in any kind of relationship where you want to give up the relationship and start something new. Now that's okay if you're a Mormon. Male Mormon. Development as a structured progression that is both steadfast and enduring. The endlessness of the experiential way. The abstract will never be aware. That is, the abstract will never really transcend. It will not come with us. It will last as long as humans are here. And this is the beginning of that process. And the first line of human experience, the first line that dictates the nature of our first step in human experience is accumulation, which is kind of obvious, In the beginning was the need to have. I mean, after all, that is us. We are a living organism that needs to eat. And it's Neptune exalted, which must make you feel very comfortable about our beginnings. We have a strong foundation in this experiential way. It's all kind of fuzzy there. The disillusion of old forms, if you can see them, but not at the expense of valued components that will be retained and transformed. That is the pressure to begin something new, not from scratch, evolution, but based on the foundation of the old. And this is the most important thing about human experience. There is no way that you can just start fresh. There is this continuum always. Venus in detriment, development hampered by criticism and the tendency to withdraw rather than to make use of these experiences. The difficulty in starting something new because of criticism that accompanied the old. So look, everything about being able to start something new means you have to have been able to finish something. This is one of the most important things for abstract beings. Yes, they are going to flitter and move and jump and leap all of their lives. But if they don't do 35 things at the same time, if they do one thing at a time and go through it, then they gain a clear value from their experience. Remember something about being abstract. You know nothing until it's over. In other words, you go through the day at work. Things went wrong, problems, whatever it may be. But if you think about that while you're in that process at work, you will not figure it out at all. At all. Because the abstract is not there to be in the moment. It's there to move through experience and then reflect on the past. This is what the abstract is. So the human way is to go through the experience and explain it later. It's what ultimately created literature. You know, all of this storytelling and all of this stuff, that's the way. And each time that you accomplish something, each time that you complete something, you gain power. Because you gain the awareness that comes after the experience. Second line. It's an interesting line. These people don't know that they're always ready to start something new until you ask them. I mean, if nobody ever asks them, they just stay with the old. Success breeds success. It's interesting to think about that. You know, they stay with the same thing. You know, they stay with finishing things, going through naturally. They don't know they're supposed to be doing that. It is what they are designed to do. The moon exalted, the protection of early success nurtures further achievement. Now remember that this word success, all that means is that what you started, you finished. So if you can start and finish things when you're young, it gives you greater strength to be able to do that as you mature. Again, this success breeds success, it's an intro line, and you always know when there's an introduction to the line before the exalted is mentioned, you always know that means that this is a life process. Mars and detriment, a tendency with early success to haste and imprudent action, the pressure based on success to be impatient for something new. I've done this job, give me the next job and better be at a higher level. When they're called out. Depression. We saw that when we were looking at the other side, the 52nd gate, keeping still mountain, that this was a gate of depression because one could be passive, but if one didn't have something to focus on, that it would become disturbing and depressive. So here in the 53, what we have is the energy, the root adrenaline energy, the pressure to begin something new. It's a pressure, remember that. It's a constant pressure, a lifelong pressure for somebody who has this gate to start something new. If there is no way to complete it, if there is no way to actually start, if there's just the pressure, it leads to depression. The gate of freedom. The freedom is the ability to release the pressure. And in releasing the pressure, to begin the process of taking things to completion. The third line. Practicality. Notice here, this is not an intro line. So this is genetic material operating from the start. In its most natural position. So this is an exalted third line. The concentration on avoiding conflict to ensure protection and continued development. The pressure to eliminate conflict in order to develop. So look, these are people that want to start things. But they don't know that there's somebody on the other side. And they're not going to be able to start anything until they meet somebody on the other side. And when they bang into them, they realize that all of a sudden the most important thing is human interaction. All of the lower trigram is stunned the moment they meet the other side. You know? It's like whatever they're carrying with them, all of a sudden they forget that, because it's like, wow, you know, there's something here. I'm not alone in my little personal destiny. There is actually something here. And oh my God, I'm going to be dependent on them, because I'm not going to be able to start this unless I can get along with them. You know, the whole difference in the lower trigram, remember that the third line is very different than the first and second line. The first and second line are the basic binary. But the third line is carrying different information. It's getting ready, because it's unstable like the fourth line, it's getting ready to move to the next octave. And as such, it bangs into the other all the time. So here, there is this, you know, the moon, most natural, avoiding conflict. And that's their secret. If they can avoid conflict, they can start something new. But what is the theme of third lines? The theme of third lines, that these are lines of adaptation. And these lines of adaptation operate through a wave of bonds made and broken, trial and error. This is a classic position. This is why this line's exalted. It's a classic position. You're in the gate of starting things, and you're in the third line that loves to start things and stop and start something else. Analytically, when it's a client of yours, and they come to you with the 53rd gate, you know, what I say to them is that get a job where you start things, but don't get a job where you have to finish them. Your job is to start things. Get somebody else to finish it. And then you're great. But the moment you try to finish it yourself, you're going to be depressed. Very powerful depression exists in these format gates in the root if they don't get their opportunity to fulfill themselves. And again, that depression is only there if you're unaware, after all. You know, it is not there. Depression does not exist if you're yourself. Melancholy does. Depression is delusionary. Melancholy is chemical. The Mars and detriment, the unconscious provoking of conflict that logically threatens security and development. Energy which provokes conflict and threatens development. You know, these are people that say, I'm going to start something new no matter what you think. You know, they bang into somebody, and instead of making the best out of what they can socially with the other, trying to learn how to deal with the other, they simply say they're just going to do it anyway. The hell with you. I don't need you. I'll find somebody else. And then they'll try again to find somebody else. Nothing wrong with that. You know, if that's really their nature, then they will see that if they're following their own nature, they will start things themselves that are not dependent on others. Fourth line. Keep in mind that we're dealing with a cross of penetration. You know, this capacity to begin things, this is one of the more powerful forces that we have in the wheel. The fourth line is transpersonal. It's fixed. Fourth line. Keep in mind that we're dealing with a cross of penetration. You know, this capacity to begin things, this is one of the more powerful forces that we have in the wheel. The fourth line is transpersonal. It's fixed. The moon exalted the ability to maintain the strength of one's individuality in complex and often awkward situations that ensured continued security and development. It says the pressure to maintain one's individuality in confused beginnings. In other words, at this point, it's already recognized that you need the other. It's transpersonal, that you need the other for completion. And this assuredness is about maintaining your identity in all of that. Because beginnings are by their very nature confusing. You know, it's like mutation. The moment mutation arrives, it's confusing until it's ordered out. Information is confusing until you can make sense of it or you can logically piece it together. The Venus in detriment, the persistent difficulty with embarrassing or awkward situations where normal emotional reactions may prove detrimental. Individual pressure for beginnings that creates awkward and sometimes embarrassing situations. Yeah, well, what to do? You know, these are people that when they're ready to start something, it can often be at the wrong time. You know, like starting an argument with you, you know, when you open your eyes on your birthday. You know? I have a gift for that. Why do you have to start that now? Their partner says. If you're living out your own nature, even if you have the nastiest timing, it's correct what to do. And if you don't honor that timing, it doesn't work for you. And if your partner spends all of their time constantly asking you why you had to ask them at that moment, they're really not for you because they don't get it. They either tell you to shut up or they deal with it, but they don't ask you why you're asking them at that moment. I mean, timing is precious to each and every one of us. We really are a timed mechanism. You know, this metaphor of the watch, you know, the time ticking down, whatever the hell you want to call all that. You know, we're a mechanism. At the end of the fourth line, the cross changes. From the cross of penetration, the 51-57 become the 42-32. So you have a juxtaposition cross of beginnings, 53-54, 42-32. Obviously, this is a fixed fate to start things. And of course, any juxtaposition can appear to be obsessive from either the right or left angle. And that isn't to say that it is obsessive. We all are, given our limitation. You know, the juxtaposition is a 4-1. That is the personality sun in a fourth line and the design sun in the first line. And as a 4-1, you have this combination of both foundations in the hexagram structure. You have a very, very fixed way of dealing with existence. So as such, from either the left or the right, they can appear to be rigid. However, that's their fate. The left angle cross is called the left angle cross of cycles. In this left angle cross of cycles, you have people that will have 4 specific cycles in their life. If you've got people who come in on the cross of the 4 ways, they will live 4 different ways in their life, if they live so long. And these cycles are determined by the position of the nodes of the moon. In other words, each new cycle kicks in every 18.6 years, and the cycles always begin with the design Earth. The fifth line is called assertion. Again, Neptune exalted. Interesting that here both the foundation, the first line, which is what the hexagram essentially is, and the fifth line, which is how the hexagram is projected upon from the outside, both of them have Neptune exalted. In other words, both in terms of its foundation and how it's perceived, beginnings are not well understood. The other thing is, from a mystical point of view, it's really saying that beginnings are deeply mystical. In other words, that this is a magical thing, this cyclical process. It's magical, by the way, because we move. I mean, most human beings forget that, don't consider that. If we didn't move, everything would be static. We move in space. We move. This movement is the difference. Any one of you who stay long enough in human design to have 20 or 30 years of cycles that you can look at, you'll discover that you go through exactly the same things over and over and over again, but they're different each time because you're moving. But they're the same cycles. The underlying and often psychic recognition of the intrinsic values of development, that even in periods of isolation, has the assertiveness to maintain direction. Think about this as the general, eh? It's a great description of the general. Its very power garners continued support even from those who are basically opposed. You know, if you need to get something started, there are so many great starters in the world, eh? You need to get something started. You have to get it going. It's the general that you seek out because you project on the general that they have this Neptunian, whatever, this quality that can really get things going and get other people to join in. Mystically, the second line is always called, but the fifth line does the calling. The second line is the hermit, but the fifth line is the heretic. The harmony between the two. The pressure to recognize the value of development and the energy for beginnings regardless of circumstances. It's the importance of the fifth line. They're useless other than in times of crisis when they can bring practical provisions. And they're not useless to their pigs on the farm. I mean, just everybody else. Eh? This line of universalization. The earth and detriment. An over-assertiveness that rather than apply to maintaining support in the face of opposition and isolation may actually strengthen the opposing forces by its attitude, where the energy for beginnings attracts the very forces that can abort them. It doesn't say will abort them. I mean, one of the gifts of the five is that the five has to be able to seduce both sides. You know, it's like the politician that can get a little bit from the right and a little bit from the left in order to get their legislation across. They have to be able to seduce both sides. But of course, in going towards and trying to involve in a new beginning, those forces that may be by their very nature opposed, there is a much greater challenge there. And they may not succeed. And if they don't succeed, their reputation goes in the toilet. I mean, the whole thing about being a fifth line is that if you cannot live up to the projection, then where you are punished is in your reputation. In other words, the positive projection becomes a negative projection. Nah, that's a paper tiger. That one can't really do it. That's all just mask. That's all just bluff. They're fakes. Even if it isn't true, it doesn't matter if it's true. It's not about truth. It's about projection. Where the energy for beginnings attracts the very forces that can abort it. Language is something that I love deeply. I have my design Earth in 62. The detail of communication. Language is essential. Look at the language carefully, because it's often just simply a matter of the verb that changes and clarifies your understanding of that very line. Right? People often just jump on things and say, aha, you know, this is always going to cause problems and it's never going to be solved and blah, blah, blah. It's not true. You've got to read the line carefully. The sixth line, phasing. 53 sixes can be like all six lines because they're pointed towards the future and they're pointed towards mutation. And because they have this inherent position at the roof of the hexagram to have their own view, there's always within them the obverse of what they're supposed to be. You know, it's like the 59-6 that you expect to be out on the town every night. And they have nothing to do with sex or intimacy at all. So whenever you see 6 lines, particularly when you're doing readings at that level, recognize that how you treat that gate that they have, that 6th line, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're living out. It means that's what they're watching. I mean, that's what they're paying attention to. The 53-6 is paying attention to new beginnings. It's always alert to the latest things that are going on. It's always interested in a possibility for it. But of course, when it was young, it went through its 3rd line phase. Trial and error, got burnt, and then pulled away. The moon exalted. The successful utilization of the completion of a stage in development that's by its very evident success and value can be used as an example to attract support for the next stage. Basic. The energy to attract support for beginnings based on the success of the past. Now the whole thing about the 53-6 is it knows that if it didn't get it to work in the past, it's not going to get the support for the future, so it's just not going to get involved in new beginnings, and it's going to stay where it is and get depressed. 53-6s tend to be, well, they tend to be depressive wise people. You know this type? You know, this kind of, they're not very happy with everything, but they can really tell you a lot about what to start, what not to start, what it's like to get caught. You know, the 53 wants to start things and it gets stuck so often. The Pluto in detriment. A tendency in this position to hide success in the perverse fear that the success will either create excessive demands or supporters of the original process will end their support upon completion. The pressure to hide beginnings in fear of losing past support. Every time you start something and you finish it, this is the other side of the 6th line. You know, the kid that gets burnt. You know, you have the kid that does well in school. You know, they go through each thing, they finish it, they do well in school, and every time they do well, there's more pressure on them to do better. You've completed that stage, now you better complete the next one and do it better. And you get this incredible pressure that keeps building and building and building and building and building. So there is a withdrawal from this that says, just because I did that, don't put me under pressure to do that over again and better. And of course, the natural tendency for the 53 is that to complete things is what is important. That's all. And at the point of completion, they will naturally have a timing to begin again. And this is the most important difference between 53s that get the opportunity to complete things and 53s who don't. The ones who do complete things don't always have to start something new. They get this level of satisfaction in their process that they know that they can complete what they start. And then they can wait. They can sit on the hill and wait to see if there's anything really worth starting again. The other side of that is they get to that point where they realize they can do things, but they don't like the pressure. Remember, this is very collective. And they don't like the pressure because once they've completed it, they have a chance to sit on their laurels. I did that. I don't have to do it again. I don't have to prove it to you. I already did it. The 53rd gate, because it is so important to us, it tells us something about the nature of what it is to be a human being and what we are here to experience. That is, we're here to experience the completion of processes. That's why we're born and we die. You know, we're here to see what it means to start and finish things. So everything about existence, as far as we can tell, is about starting and finishing things because that's our limitation. Everything seems to be born and everything seems to die and all of these things, that is our limitation. But it is the nature of what we are. And it says clearly that for all of us in our human experience, that what we enter into, we must complete in order to be able to move on, whatever it happens to be. And unless we enter into things as ourselves, we do not get to complete them. And that thing that is the do not complete them is usually illness and depression and problems. So the moment that you enter into anything, whether that is love or friendship or work, if you enter into it complete, if you enter into it as your nature, then you're going to be able to reach that point of completion. And that's the most important thing about being human, is that what you start, you finish. And of course, that is, as a mantra, as a cliche, obnoxious as hell. Because for so many of us, being unaware, we can't stand it. Because you go around saying, yeah, I know, but I mean, there's certain circumstances and situations where you can't, and it's not true. What you cannot complete is what you haven't entered into correctly. It's not you. The not self, your not self, can't finish anything. The beginnings of things leads to detail, to the 60-second gate.